All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get going. And I'm hoping everybody can see that now. Very good. All right, good morning, everybody. Like I said, it's rather early here, but nevertheless, I'm an early bird and enjoy getting up early. So today we're going to present, advance my screen here just a second. There we go. So today we're going to present a paper that is currently out for review at a journal that was written by Dr. Balzer, who's in this session, myself, Chris Shannon, who also has, I believe, presented in this conference, and Mikhail Shilov, who's going to be my co-presenter today. And we're presenting on, the title of our paper is Successful Implementation of Lean in Higher Education Depends on What Happens in the Rapid Improvement Event. And it's a framework for understanding. And the objective is to explore how the steps taken before, during, and after the implementation of a rapid improvement event, how does that affect overall the success of Lean in the higher education institution? So real quick, I want to do a quick poll. Is everybody to see that poll? Should be on your screen right now, or no? Okay, go ahead and do it. Very good, thank you. All right. I'll just give it a few more seconds here. Just about everybody's responded. Okay, I'm going to share the results real quick. So it looks like we have an overall pretty wide range of experience here. Most people, we got all the way from participating in RA to I don't even know what an RA is. So we'll explain that as we go on here in just a moment. Get back to my screen. Okay. And so I just want to give a little background for what we looked at when we decided to launch this study. But first of all, for those who don't understand or don't know what RIE is a rapid improvement event. Oftentimes it's called Kaizen or Kaizen Blitz, and that's mostly referred to in the private sector. And really the rapid improvement event is just simply selecting a process that you want to improve or a process that is subpar performing and working on that process in a very quick amount of time. So typically a rapid improvement event is anywhere from 1 to 3 days. You start with looking at a current process, and then you finish with a new revised process that you implement it also within those 3 days. So that's why it's called the rapid improvement events. You don't do it over a period of a month or 2 months. You do it in typically one to 3 days is very typical. And as we got into this, we started looking at Lean in higher education, and certainly the interest has peaked quite a bit in the last 20 years. And one of the things that we noticed is that the Lean practices that are typically adopted, the rapid improvement event is the most popular. It's something that is, when I was in the industry, it was one of the most popular things for us also because it was a very good culture starter. Once you've got 3 or 4 rapid improvement events across the plant, a lot of times this started the culture of the continuous improvement that's so ingrained in Lean. And in Lean, as we look through the literature, a lot of the rapid improvement events are focused on administrative processes, things like hiring processes or curriculum development or faculty search. But there is a growing interest in applying Lean and RIE to teaching and scholarly activities. And what we do know is that RIEs are not always successful. Sometimes the processes are not sustained. Sometimes you don't get the results, and there's a host of reasons for why this happens, and that's what we're going to explore in this paper. And out there in the literature, as we look for this, as we're writing the paper, there's not a lot of documentation on failure. So some of the causes of Lean that we've seen in the literature are very broad and general, like leadership and culture. And that is certainly, those are both very important items, but again, it's very general. And I think you can apply lack of leadership and culture to about any situation. So we want to get a little bit more in depth of why it fails. So we believe that there's a new perspective is needed on LH, failure of lean in higher education. And just because the IRE is so popular that it warrants a look at the effectiveness of how the rapid improvement event then affects the overall lean initiative within an institution. So therefore, we believe that the rapid improvement success can be directly correlated, or we believe could be directly correlated to lean success in higher education. And so this paper and this presentation is more about the framework for understanding the role of the rapid improvement event in the overall holistic implementation of lean in higher education. So real quick before you go on, and I'm just going to pose this question, you can respond in chat and my colleague Mikhail will monitor it. So just elaborate a little bit on your experience, if you've had experience in an IRE, and what type of projects have you completed using the IRE, and what were the results? So we don't now go for anything detailed, just were the results positive, were they negative, were the results positive but not sustained? Just give us a few ideas of what you've experienced if you have been a person that's been involved in a rapid improvement event. And we'll monitor that chat as we go on, so feel free to take time thinking about that. So looking at lean success and failure, Dr. Balls, who's in this session, did a review of like 64 publications. And in that review, most of them were mostly positive that success was reaped from lean in higher education. These were composed of a lot of case studies, conceptual studies, and not very many empirical studies. And without the lack of empirical studies, there's no direct assessment at this point to understand what the effectiveness of lean really means. It's not conclusion-based off of metrics that you can actually measure. So the assessment of the effectiveness in lean, we believe that is something that's definitely needed. Other researchers have speculated that the failure rate is up between 50 and 95%. That's pretty high. But again, there's no empirical studies that are lacking. There's nothing that really supports this out there. And we kind of kicked it around, like why is there such a high, why is there not a lot of documentation out there to publicize the failure? And maybe it's because institutions don't want to actually air their dirty laundry. If they spend a lot of money on lean initiative, it doesn't work, they don't want to put that out there, publicize it. Or is it possible that some journals out there just prefer to publish more positive results? So we're not sure what the answer to these are, but that's just what we've been thinking. But what we do know is that failure is very important in lean, and it's really necessary, because failure results in reflection, which then of course should lead to improvement, which is again the basis of the continuous improvement philosophy that is so pinnacle to lean. The trial and error method that Toyota talks about is each and every day the worker at the lowest level is trying to experiment and do better by trial and error to eventually incrementally improve their process throughout the day, which then improves the entire organization. And once you do have failure, things like structured problem solving, using those different tools of lean and identifying countermeasures, allows you then to really reap the benefits of failure. So a few more factors that we found that contribute to lean. Some are project selection, lack of resources, poor training, high cost implementation. Other resources that there's so many tools in lean, they're not sure what to do. There's a disconnect between lean and a strategic direction. And sometimes lean experts are brought in that do a very good job, but when they depart, the lean initiative just falls apart quickly because the whole philosophy was not truly instilled. Others talk about the team size in an RIE, communication, scope creep of a project, or just your normal resistance to change when you're trying to bring in lean into an institution. And I think that's especially relevant to higher education. Also, lean can be a disjoint set of projects versus a very coherent implemented business strategy. So somebody might get the idea to launch lean, They may not be very well versed. They try and bring it to the university and it doesn't go very well. Poor allocation of lean tasks between specialists and leaders can also lead to failure. And one of the last things I like to bring up is, and I just recently read this in the Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker. It's the second edition to his book that was originally published, I think, in 2002. And in his second edition, he talks heavily about organic versus mechanistic lean. And what his philosophy is organic lean is essentially not just grabbing things like 5S, the rapid improvement event, ocean planning, not grabbing these tools and just specifically using them. His view on organic lean and why that's the best approach is that you, with amongst the leadership and the entire organization, you instill the philosophy of continuous improvement and the removal of waste. And once you instill that philosophy, however you decide to go lean, that's the way you're going to succeed versus trying to have a checklist of tools and just cherry pick and implement them in a discrete fashion. So that to me is very important. So I'm going to take a look at the chat here. Michaela, have you had a chance to look at that and respond and summarize anything?
Yes, very good, positive experiences, and some repetitive in a way that people do address similar areas, for example, finance and HR and hiring process. So for the most part, what I noticed is those are administrative processes, such as also admissions and IT and library services. Those are good examples. I saw 75% positive. One person wrote, sorry, I can't see that anymore who that was. Oh, it was Chris Cousins. And but I also saw one academic school restructuring. So that was one of the academic areas. And it kind of correlates with what we see in the literature as well, that mostly it's done in the administrative processes rather than academia. So that is interesting to see the feedback. And mostly positive, don't see any negative experiences. Okay.
All right, very good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mikhail to present the model.
Can you bring back the presentation?
I sure can. Okay. Just get the. Okay, can you see it, Mikhail?
Yep.
Very good. Oh, sorry about that. Okay.
All right.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, so yeah, I'll be talking about the conceptual framework for understanding and improving. And the framework is based on Dr. Balzer's model that includes 3 chronological phases. And it was developed and based on the consolidation of practices at 7 US and UK universities. And we know that RIE is a critical activity between the lean higher education implementation as a system and the continuous improvement university processes. And just like Dr. Kluse was saying, right, the decisions at each phase can affect the RIE and the overall lean implementation. And RIE is also the most common tool in lean higher education, and its implementation and the way it goes, the problems and the way it goes in any phase can limit the RIE and also affect the lean implementation. And the lean phases are, phase 1, it's what happens before the RIE and the processes of selection of processes and the preparation. Then we have the phase 2, what happens during the event. Then after the event, after what's going on after the RIE. And also, according to the framework, the steps taken during all of these phases are affected and happening within a larger context of existing institutional practices. And several of these practices are known to affect the success of RIE and as a result, lean higher education. For example, they include leadership, of course, and organizational culture. So let's look closer at each of the phases, but before we do that, we have a second chat, and this time Dr. Kluse will be monitoring it. And if you could provide an answer to this question, what factors during the RIE do you think or know may contribute to the success or failure of the rapid improvement event? And outside of the organizational culture and leadership. So what the other factors do you think contribute to that? And Dr. Kluse will monitor the chat. Okay, so let's look at the phase one. And phase one starts with identifying the process targeted for improvement. And so what I'll be listing the steps in each of the phases, but also mentioning a little bit of a detail about what can go wrong in each of those phases. And for a few of them, there will be a little more discussion for a few of them. So when we're identifying the process, it is important that it's correlated with the overall strategy of the university and the priorities of the institution. Then when we're organizing the team, poor selection of team members, for example, people who are not, have limited knowledge in the processes, or they were not selecting representatives appropriately from the key areas, that can have an effect on RIE. That's what our research indicates. Because the people, if the right people are not selected, their solutions might not be efficient and might not be accepted to the people in those areas that are being improved. Then through the training of our IE team that I will talk a little more in the next slide, we're moving to the scope of the problem, scope of the RIE event. And there are two extremes. It can be too wide or too narrow. And if it's too narrow, then it might be misaligned with the goals of the university, or it might benefit only a small portion of people. So it will not be successful then. Then in terms of gathering the information and identifying the beneficiaries, identifying beneficiaries actually really closely linked with the organization of the team, because if the right people are not selected, then they don't know what problems people in the area that's being improved experience. So then it can't provide the proper improvement. Then establishing the metrics, again, a little more detail will be covered in the next two slides. And when we're gathering the information, the lack of qualitative and quantitative data will be not good for the baseline assessment of the baseline performance, and it may lead to inaccurate conclusions regarding the improvements that are needed. And finally, we have logistical preparations that includes resources such as people and financial resources and space or even technical preparations that are needed. So all of those have an effect on the outcome of the event. So I will look closely at the train the RIE team and establish the metrics. So let's look at the train the RIE team. And here it's of course important, the content and design and the delivery of the training is very important. And what can go wrong? If the training content is deficient, for example, the waste categories are not aligned with the environment where it is presented, then we can misidentify the wastes or not even consider them. Another problem can be that if process map is incomplete or unclear, or it's partially completed or rushed, then we don't fully understand the problem and of course can't improve it properly. And the second big problem with training is inadequate training of the facilitator. And actually the problem with that goes through all areas of RIE. Facilitator is extremely important, and we see this in literature. And the problems with the facilitator can be limited knowledge in the lean higher education principles, or undeveloped facilitation skills or experience. The next one will be the metrics. And adequate metrics are important for assessing and documenting, and as a result, improving the processes. And what can happen here is if we fail to collect the operational data, then we don't have a baseline for our improvement. And if we fail to collect, thank you. And if we fail to collect the critical RIE metrics, then it will be difficult to communicate the benefits of the future state to the constituents so that they are motivated and engaged in the improvements. All right, then we're moving to phase 2, and it has a lot of steps. It's a very important phase in the RIE event. And through the validation of the preparation tasks, overviewing of the RIE is important to the team members, so that there is a clear understanding of the role RIE plays in the larger context of the lean higher education. Then through the reviewing of the baseline performance and documenting the visual map that will be reviewed in the next slide, we move into the understanding of the waste and impediments to flow. And of course, you know that understanding and elimination of waste is central in lean thinking. And for example, as was mentioned earlier, if waste categories are not tailored to the process being studied, then it may result in a misidentification of those wastes, and it can affect the RIE outcome. All right, next we're moving to the development of improvement ideas. And although logical, it can be a little tricky because some members might propose their ideas way before the analysis of the current state is done. And of course, without the proper knowledge of the current state and the metrics that go to assess the process, that might, the result might be subpar because not all the aspects are included. So it's based on experience rather than on the knowledge that was obtained through the previous steps. All right, next we're moving to the future state where we are proposing, testing, verifying, and identifying the future state map, developing that. And the failures here can occur if the new process is not fully vetted and problems are overlooked. And of course, that affects the outcome of the RIE event. Then in the implementation stage, the failure can occur if people responsible for that implementation are not selected correctly, or if people that were not involved in the process are not buying into the improvement ideas. So there will be resistance to the implementation. And similar problems exist in the remaining steps, including the report out by the RIE team, where LHE failure or rapid improvement event failure is possible if the team fails to generate interest and support from the local leaders. So the two things that I'll review in a little more detail are document visual map of the current process state, current state process, and the analysis of the current state process. in the next slides. So starting with the documented visual map, the failure can occur if team members are not actively engaged in creating the visual map. And for multiple reasons that can occur. For example, if the previously developed map was shared instead of creating a new one with the team that was selected, or a facilitator can develop the map by themselves instead of having input from the team, or an experienced facilitator is unable to guide the team and capture the accurate map. So those could be the reasons for failure in this step. And of course, Dr. Kluse mentioned the Lycra and the newer edition of the book. It is very important in Lean to go and see the process firsthand. So instead of relying on the reports and what's going on and the explanations of others, it's better to go and see firsthand and understand in reality what the process is like to understand the current state. Okay, and analyzing the current state, here the failure can occur if the analysis of the current state process is superficial and it fails to bring all wastes and impediments. I'm reading here. And what are the reasons? The reasons can be that the analysis is rushed, so not enough time is spent analyzing it, or the training was limited, so the team doesn't understand how the analysis is done, or again, going back to the waste categories and the way they're tailored to the Lean Higher Education. Poor facilitation, as we can see, and we saw in our research, it goes through the entire event and affects many aspects of it. And of course, ignoring politically and personally sensitive problems can have an effect on the outcomes too, because all of that limits understanding of the current process and the number of problems identified. Okay, then final phase is phase 3, after what happens after the RIE event. And the steps include reaffirming the leadership, then implementation of the new process, and then after that, it will be the sustaining of the process after it's implemented and vetted that everything works. So regarding the sustaining of the new process, and that's a little later after these two steps. Yes, so after, So regarding the sustaining the new process, the failure can occur if there is no clear communication and proper support. And of course here, the expectations, clear expectations and training are extremely important of the people who are not necessarily involved in the event, but people who are involved in the process. So proper training and instructions for those people are very important, and if not provided, can lead to RIE failure and as a result, Lean Higher Education failure. And the one of these I'll review in a little more detail is implementing and monitoring the new process. So here, the local leadership is extremely important because DK and local leadership support can contribute to LHE failure, and if it's declined or withdrawn. And yes, one more second. And again, local leadership is important because they not only support in the process at that level, but they also promote the change within their departments and promote the new process and help sustaining it in the long run. Okay, now we will review the responses in the chat. Hopefully, Dr. Kluse, did you have?
Yeah, there's a few good responses in the chat about what the failure. One was problem awareness, limitations on the team. There was a question posed of, isn't implementation part of the RE? And it definitely is. Implementation is the ultimate ultimate conclusion of the RA is the actual implementation. So to answer that question, and that was pretty much most of the comments. And one was very good, the ability to make decisions. That is definitely important. So if you got people in that RE that cannot make decisions, it's probably going to fail. So that was a really good comment because I've actually personally witnessed that, experienced that myself. Okay. We'll go on to the final portion with just a kind of a summary of the framework about the understanding and proving of the RE and their effectiveness. So we know that many factors can affect lean implementation overall at an institution or a facility. And the absence of the framework surely can stifle lean in higher education, both research and in the application end. So our framework is basically focused on just the RE itself. But what we're trying to look at is how that RE then has that overall effect on the entire lean implementation. So how important is executing a good rapid improvement events? How does that then correlate to the overall success in lean and higher education? Is it a significant factor? And the intent was to determine if that essentially will ultimately affect lean and higher education, whether positive or negative. So an example that could lead to failure in lean is if you had a significant misunderstanding of the current state process, it ends up becoming a snowball effect, which then it'll waste time for the process. You may have lack of improvement because the future state may not be desirable because the current state was not actually well understood. If you have other less consequential errors can also cause failure and lead to the failure of lean overall. And that would be, the rapid improvement event then does not meet the expectation of stakeholders, so they get disgruntled. The rapid improvement event doesn't engage the people that are going to eventually have to execute the process that you are working on. And that does limit the overall RE effectiveness. And then that surely correlates to limiting the overall improvement within the institution itself. So again, RE should not be taken lightly. You want to plan these things very carefully so you do ensure success. You don't have the snowball effect. And there's a lot of guidance out there there's not a lot of guidance out there from evidence-based research, as we mentioned before. It's a lot of perception-based experience that's out there that's in the literature. There's a lot of good history in lean out there to guide the REs that I would encourage people to look at. Again, Dr. Balzer synthesized 3 best practices into the 3 phases of the RE, which we just went over in detail. Yorkstone had vast recommendations about approaches and tools for to have a successful rapid improvement event. And experts outside of higher education can't provide really good guidance on the rapid improvement event. Like I had mentioned before, I had done a lot when I was in the private sector, and there's certainly a lot of practices that are applicable to higher education, and then some researchers have actually supported that. And recognizing the importance or the potential for failure is important to recognize. If you can recognize when failure is going to occur, the facilitator themselves can then respond, adjust, and keep the rapid improvement event from going off the rails and not getting to the ultimate results and having a new improved process. So it does not get derailed. So a good example is if you fail to generate support from local leaders, it's going to surely affect the future state of that new process. It's just not going to work for you. And again, one of the tools that is used, can be used often to predict failure is the FEMA. So the FEMA allows you to look at each step of the RIE and understand either what went wrong or what can go wrong, and if something was to go wrong, what is the risk and the countermeasures you put in place to then get that RE back on track and for future RE events to further improve them. And once you do have failure that you've identified, certainly using structured tools like the 5-why or the fishbone cause and effect is a good tool to solve problems during the RE and to improve the RE program itself. And we do know that limited lean approach without the fundamental pillars of continuous improvement does not end up in sustaining improvement within the organization. So it kind of goes back a little bit to what I mentioned that Dr. Jeffrey Leiker mentioned, the organic versus mechanistic lean. Organic lean is that overall instilling the continuous improvement philosophy within the organization and not just utilizing the tools. That's the best chance you have for success, is getting everybody on board and having that benchmark or that baseline of continuous improvement as a common theme. And again, just only focusing on the rapid improvement may not end up in the long-term results. The rapid improvement event surely will always get you, not always, but it will typically get you good results at the start, but it may not allow you to have that full transition into lean within the organization. Again, the framework targeted the rapid improvement event. However, it considers that the model shows that institutional practices can affect the overall process itself. So not just the RIE, but the institutional practices. And an example is if you have a good strategic plan that identifies a selection process, in phase one, if you have poor leadership, it could compromise the scoping and allow that RIE to not be successful. In the second phase, if you're not testing and verifying the future state properly, that will certainly not allow a good future state to be implemented. And then in the third phase, the leadership support to implement, if it's just not there at the institutional level, it surely isn't going to work. So the institutional practices do interact with the three phases of the RIE for the overall success of lean. And certainly the practices, the institutional practices that we mentioned in the model, they are certainly further and definitely need further research of how they affect LHE. So a few of the limitations is some of the research that we found were mostly, as we mentioned before, come from case studies, self-report, surveys, and insights. So the lack of empirical data was surely a limitation. And we know that as a result of that, the empirical-based research in LHE is surely still needed. And one thing that we found is that the lean success, lean failure, there's really not a common accepted definition out there. And a couple of research put out the concept that don't try to be too discrete in defining what success is or what failure is. Look at more in terms of progress. And what that means is instead of looking at it very discretely, you want to look at developing metrics at the beginning as a baseline. And as you progress forward, how do you progress towards the goal, the metric that you set as the goal? So instead of deeming something a success for failure, just look at that progress toward the goal that you set. And understanding the factors that can influence lean success was beneficial. And we believe that a definition would be very beneficial for everybody that does do work in lean research. At minimum, if you do research, at least within your own area, define specifically what success or failure means to you, so you have the context of what your research is then presenting. Other than that, that concludes our presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Chris, thank you so much for that fascinating presentation. My internet is a bit shaky, so if I'm sounding robotic, let me know.
I see that.